the New Jersey State Conference NAACP Statewide Housing Chair Michael McNeil, and thank you to all the panelists who are participating in this panel. Thank you.
Before we really get into the meat and potatoes of things, I'd just like to take a second or two to have a moment of silence for Judge Palmer, James Palmer, which he was in Burlington County doing landlord-tenant court, and also in Ocean County. And Judge Palmer wasn't just a judge, but he became a great friend to me. And I would like to have a moment of silence and dedicate this housing meeting to Judge Palmer. And if anyone on the panel would like to say a couple of words about Judge Palmer, feel free to before we get into the meat and potatoes. Okay. Okay. Everybody still there?
Mike, I'm totally in shock right now. I didn't hear anything about this.
Okay. Well, Mike, we all, it's the first time this was done. It was everybody's working. We still got a lot of people that can't get on. As I said before, we want to hear your comments from the landlord side. You represent a lot of the landlords. That's why we have Chris
right
here from Legal Services, the whole team.
Right. No, I'm saying regarding Judge Palmer, I'm like totally in shock. I adore Judge Palmer, and when you said you want a moment of silence, that's the first something that I've heard anything happen to him.
Are you kidding me?
No. God. Is this something recent?
Yeah, very recent, and very much so a surprise to everyone. It wasn't, we're all still kind of in shock.
Yeah, I mean that's why I was referring to. I'm like, I don't even have any comments. I'm like completely astounded by it.
My name is Ella McCancy. I work as an organizer at Fair Share Housing Center. But I gotta say before I start that I'm truly blessed and grateful to be here today. First to Mike for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to speak a little bit about affordable housing. But I also want to say thank you to everyone here, for all the work you do to make this gathering, this organization possible. I'm sort of new to this racial justice work, this organizing work. So yeah, but I'm 100% sure that I wouldn't have this opportunity I do today if it's not for Kara and Mike and my director Eric, Bruce Morgan, Tracy Rogers, Kelly Francis, William Scott, all the great people. So I just want to first start off by making sure I say thank you to all those people. So I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't hear that last part.
I said most of them are on our housing team.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so like I was saying, I'm an organizer with Fair Share Housing Center. Specifically, I'm here today to talk a little bit about affordable housing and why Black communities aren't getting access to all the affordable housing units. This is something Mike has observed in his work throughout New Jersey. So a development will go up, there's a lottery, but a lot of people in the Black community don't get access to it. So, that's something we're working to change. In my experience, I've noticed three main issues, and that's information, preparation, and money. Let me see. Yeah, in regards to information, I think it's pretty obvious. I'm sure most of us here know that in the next 5 years, something like 50,000 new units are going to go up in the state of New Jersey. But it's just a simple question. What's the address for those 50,000 units? Do we have that information? When is it going to be available? And how exactly do we get people inside those units? And that's my job. That's something I'm here to help everyone out with. I'll let folks know when the housing goes up. I'll let you all know when they start taking the application, how the process works. And then the next thing, once I do that is, we can move on to preparation. I think having information is one thing, but you really got to help people qualify for these units. Letting them know what kind of documents they've got to get together. W-2s, tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs. But most importantly, I think we've got to answer the question if they're ready to move, or are they ready to move from, let's say, Newark to someplace like Short Hills, or are you ready to move to a community like Barnegat, places who have historically excluded people like us. So that's a major question that we have to answer in the process. And the last thing obviously is money, of course. Affordable housing, it's called affordable housing, but it still costs money. We got to know how much exactly do you need to move into one of the new units. Is it $2,000? Is it $3,000? If you're buying a home, what do you need for down payment, closing costs, appraisal, all the fees you've got to pay. One thing we're working on right now is trying to prepare folks to move into some units in Toms River, Gabriel Run, and there are 8 units that are slated to go in a lottery December 5th, and right now they are taking pre-applications. But it's one thing to put in an application for an affordable unit that's going to be maybe $500 in rent, but before you get to the part where you pay $500 a month in rent, you've got to know how much you've got to pay in security deposit, pet fees, utility costs, utility fees, first month's rent, all those fees. You've got to know how much exactly it costs, and putting that information together, that's something I'm going to help out with, share with everybody. And once we all have that information, then we can help people move into these units. The last thing I want to say is, obviously low-income people don't have a lot of extra cash lying around, so we really have to put a plan together about how we're going to get money to help people move into these new units. Do they have friends and family that can support them, or do we have to start the conversation about federal aid, state aid, municipal aid, county aid, all those sorts of things. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I've got a link to the presentation I put together. I'll share that in the chat. It's got all my information in there, and basically, summarizes everything I've just said right now. So I look forward to connecting with more folks, more NAACP folks, to really get this work going, because in the next 5 years, we're going to have 50,000 new units. And if we don't actively work on it, we're going to realize that 5 years from now, I'm back again giving another speech about why Black communities didn't get access to the 50,000 units that got built, and what we're going to do for the next units that get built. So, yeah, that's basically it. Thank you.
What I want to say, before you go, is that part of the reason that at Fair Share Housing was that the NAACP, which has Kelly Francis and myself that sit on the board of Fair Share Housing. And one of the things that I've seen, I've been involved in, in housing, in the early part of the 80s. And they've been doing affordable housing for some time. And as you well may know, that you don't see a lot of people of color getting into these houses. And the reason why is that we are late on getting the information back, or we tend not to send it back because it's asking some of the same questions. But people have to realize that, you're getting a house, say a $300,000 home, for example, and you're only going to pay, an affordable rate, which might be, $100,000. In some cases, we have 5 houses that are going to go up, and all the person has to pay is going to be $25,000 for a brand new 3-bedroom housing. So part of what the NAACP does today, especially with myself, and working with STEPS, is that we work hand and foot with the developers. Part of our job, so to keep the prices down on housing, that we go in and we ask for the land. A nonprofit can ask for land, and then you get a developer. That's how a lot of times we keep the cost down on a lot of these houses out here. Also, that I want folks to know that one of the things that we did was that we have a very, very strong housing committee, well educated in the part of housing, some of the folks that we paid to send away to be certified. I want to say that we are ready. The problem, as I said to you earlier, are the people going to be ready? There are some things that we're going to have to do. We're going to need some help getting the information out, especially we're going to need help from you around the Jersey City areas, all of those areas where, you know, I want to make sure I say this right, where some of the housing were already in the pipeline, where some of those housing, they say, put out the information, advertise for them already. So people may see these go up and there's no advertising for it. It might be because they've done it, you know, a year ago or so when they first made agreements on the project. So what we're asking for all the branches and all the nonprofits and anybody that can help us, anytime that you see some housing go up, we want to question it. Bottom line, we definitely want to question it.
Michael, real quick, they're asking to see your face. They said they can't see your face, so look into the camera. Just in the chat room.
All right, I guess it's because of my, what do I see? Okay, is that better? Am I smiling? My camera is my screen is like real big, so my camera's like way up there, and my mic is way down here.
You can see your
so
face now, Mike.
Can you see? Am I okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Right there, where's Mike?
Okay. So I just want to let everybody know that this is really my heart of making sure that people of color get an opportunity, especially, you know, our young folks that are coming up. Because if they don't do it now within this next 5 years, as Ellen said, there's going to be a problem. And you're going to see what that problem is going to be when Michael Mearns and everybody starts talking about the eviction and all of that stuff that's coming up. So there's some major problems that we're faced with, but at the same time, there's some things that we can do ahead of time to avoid that. There's nothing like home ownership. And that's one of the things that, you know, we don't publicize enough. I don't know, it's because, you know, maybe a lot of us own homes and we feel that that's not a problem, but it is a problem because organizations such as ours, and a lot of us are on the NAACP, and I'm the chairman of the state for the NAACP. So we see a lot of problems that most people don't see. We have to work with the guys that come out of prison. We have to find homes for them. The homeless, same thing. We have to find homes for them. There is so much stuff that's going on right now that folks out there, you wouldn't believe. You just wouldn't believe. So I just want to say to you that it's important that we start opening up housing. It's important that we get our young folks on this. They can't wait, you know, another, you know, 2 years, 3 years. They have to get involved now. Home ownership is very important. It's better than buying that, you know, Mercedes or Lexus or whatever it may be. Buy a hoopty and save that money because you'll thank the NAACP in the future. Okay, thank you. Kara, did you want to add anything on that about the certification? Because Ellen brought that up, so that we, you know, that we have the certification to certify people for housing.
Just briefly, I just want to say that the growing concerns that people need affordable housing is very important. Most people will not get the information that's needed. And it was a question or a statement in the chat room about how will people, they don't know the process and the income limits. And that's important to know also, the income limits. And some people wanted information on the lottery on December the 5th. Is it rental or single homes? And maybe Ellen can go into that a little more detail. But regarding the certification, you know, there's a lot of, before you purchase a home, most loan officers want you to have a certification and take the financial literacy class so you can be prepared instead of renting, because it's different from renting. Because like if you rent something, your landlord is responsible for repairs, but if you're a homeowner, you are responsible for those repairs. And maybe Ellen would like to answer the question about the December 5th, the lottery.
Yeah, I didn't want to write a long message, but I'm gonna have. I just put some information about December 5th. It's 8 units rentals, Gabriel Run in Toms River, and let me see. I believe it's 1 bedroom very low, 2 bedrooms moderate, that 2 are available for that category, 1 bedroom low, and another 1 bedroom moderate, and I believe there's 4 units available in that category. And I've got the rent prices over there, and also, you know, the fees, how much you've got to pay in fees to get access to one of those units.
If there's any problems with anybody that apply, contact me right away. Jack Marsh is the developer for that. He's one of the guys that we're working with, that we're going to be developing houses, you know, all throughout New Jersey. So he seems to be a pretty good partner to work with. So if there's any issues. Also, our other partner, we're building about 56 homes, low, moderate, and for the very low. And the very low, one of the mayors is going to give $100,000 for 5 of the houses for the very low. So that means somebody that's on Social Security or something like that, where you're going to get a mortgage approximately about, I would say, in the 400 range per month. But that's somebody that's, you know, on like Social Security or something like that. But these are the opportunities that are out there. And one of the things that I know that I try to do whenever we go to these meetings, Cara, myself, and, you know, all the others, William Scott and Deidre and all of us, that, you know, we're asking for things. And what I mean by that is that we got to look out, not just, as I said earlier, not just for, you know, our young folks, but also, you know, our parents or grandparents or whatever it may be. So why not have them, when they're building these affordable housing and they're putting that 20% in, let it be a little set aside for the very low income. So
Michael, Olga's on the call now. Now you might want to, she finally got on, so maybe you want to.
Okay, is Olga there?
Yeah, she's in now.
I don't see her. Olga.
She's here. She's there.
Who said that? Olga. Okay, Cara, where's she at?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay, waiting on you. We just finished up a lot of the housing stuff, but we want to talk about real quick, you know, like the Rad program. I just found out the other day, Asbury Park has, I'll assume that it's a Rad program. It seems like they're trying to follow some of the procedures, but I don't know whether it is or not, but they're doing some stuff down there. But I definitely want to talk about the Rad program and where we stand with that, especially in some of our areas, especially like North Jersey, Newark, and all those areas.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, RAD stands for Rental Assistance Demonstration Project. It started out as a small pilot program, and it's expanded to cover about half the public housing in the country. And it's a way to redo public housing. For anybody who's been following housing issues on the national level for any length of time, you kind of know that public housing is viewed as a relic of the past. It's politically unpopular. It's seen as very low quality housing, and it often stands in the way of other development projects that could easily displace low income residents. So public housing has been under threat for a long time, and RAD was conceived by housing advocates and members of the HUD administration as a way to redo public housing, essentially by converting it to project-based Section 8 housing, and to create an ownership structure which can involve housing authorities, but will also involve private developers who can get tax credits to bring in new money to rehab, fix up, and in some cases, demolish and rebuild. So a lot of public housing throughout the state is going through this process. It can be just a paper transfer where public housing becomes Section 8 housing. It can involve complete demolition, moving all the residents out to wherever, giving them vouchers, displacing large communities, and in theory, at some point, rebuilding. Because the interesting thing about RAD is that it requires one-for-one replacement. However, we can't assume that all public housing is going through RAD. Asbury Park, which Mike just mentioned, is actually not going through RAD. They are planning to demolish their public housing that's right next to the train station, which has been a designated transit village and is ripe for development and gentrification efforts. and they are not going through RAD. So their intent, the last time I met with them before the pandemic, was to demolish 63 units at Lincoln Village and rebuild with some mix of mixed income housing. They also have already geared up to do an application to demolish Asbury Park Village, which is right behind the train station, maybe another 3 blocks. And, you know, also we don't know what the plans for that are. The threats there and in places like that is that if there is no promise of one-for-one replacement, then people are going to get vouchers and are going to be moved out. And in a neighborhood like Asbury, which has, you know, some of the hottest real estate in the state, it is really disruptive to the long-established African-American community there that they could easily get displaced, priced out, and moved out. And we saw some of that in Asbury with the difficulty for former residents to get into one of the new developments they did build there. So while I think RAD represents some really good opportunities to get people out of old public housing that's deteriorated and get it into much better housing, it's an opportunity for people to get portable vouchers. But demolition of public housing can also be very harmful to communities and really push people out of a community where they've lived for a long time. So anything else you want me to say on that, Mike?
Well, no, I got a couple questions. You know, like, as you well know, and I well know, that the affordables, the 30 years are gone. So when they're tearing this stuff down or whatever, what are they replacing it with?
Well, if they go through a straight Section 18, what's called a Section 18 demolition, they don't have to replace it at all. They could leave it open space. They could put something commercial there. There's no requirement that they rebuild. If they go through RAD, there is a requirement that they rebuild. It doesn't have to be on the same site, but it has to be one-for-one replacement. So the RAD properties can be a problem, but they worry me less than the straight demolitions.
Wow, that's going to be an issue. We're supposed to have a second phase of this, so you know it won't be this week or today, but we're going to continue this. Let's see how the time is running. Okay. Legal services. Natasha, would you introduce yourself? You don't have to say a whole lot, but I would like. Can you hear me, Natasha?
I can hear you, Mike. Yes.
Okay. What I'd like to do, if it's all right with you, I'd like to take and from the landlord's side, I'd like for Mike to go first. Mike Mearns to go, and then Chris can come in after Mike. Is that fair enough? Because in case there's something there that we might have a debate about or something like that.
That's fine with me.
Well, everybody know this guy is one of the toughest landlord guys around. But is that okay with you? Introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are.
I am Michael Mearn from the law office of Michael Mearn. I represent landlords throughout New Jersey.
Right. Natasha?
Hi, my name's Natasha McLaurin. I am the managing attorney of the Ocean County Office of South Jersey Legal Services, and I'm so pleased to be here. So we assist tenants mainly. We also assist homeowners in foreclosure matters, but for the most part, our work deals with tenancy issues in all aspects. So I have one of my staff attorneys, Chris Benson, who is going to talk more about the moratorium and things like that. And then of course, Olga also works for my organization and she's very wonderful and knowledgeable. But thank you very much for allowing me to be here, Mike. And I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Yeah, you're our partners. We work together. Okay, Mike. I'm
ready.
Let's start out with the laws, how you see them. Okay. We're going to go easy on you. I'm going to let you know that. We're going to go easy on you. So go ahead.
First and foremost, you started this afternoon's presentations with some shocking news about Judge Palmer. Just want to let everyone know, I practiced landlord-tenant law in 19 different counties in New Jersey. I think the only 2 counties I haven't practiced in are Salem and Cumberland County. I've been in front of about 100 judges, and I would say by far, Judge Palmer was my favorite judge that I've ever appeared in front of. Yeah. He was a true gentleman, and he was great at deciding cases, and this is like, I just got this news about a half hour ago. I'm still in shock. So I'm going to try to get through what I have to say. I'm going to start with March 13th. On March 13th, I was in Monmouth County Landlord Tenant Court handling my cases. County judge, and she said we have to go through some procedures for how we're going to handle landlord tenant court and going forward, because in order to keep everyone safe, in order to isolate, and there were some thoughts about staggering the schedules and putting people in different rooms, and it was all geared toward keeping people safe. And at that point, I thought we had a pretty good strategy for how we're going to handle landlord tenant going forward. That was March 13th. Then things declined very fast after that. March 14th, which was a Saturday, we got an email from Chief Justice Ravner of the New Jersey Supreme Court, basically saying no landlord-tenant court for the next 2 weeks. And on March 19th, Governor Murphy issued Executive Order 106, which says no lockouts until 2 months after the state of emergency is over. Now, we know that the state of emergency is kind of a moving target. They keep moving that carrot down the road. As of now, the state of emergency is scheduled to end on November 1st, which means no lockouts till January 1st. But the big issue is, in addition to obviously Executive Order 106 was a financial consideration. They don't want people being locked out and losing their homes when the state is in financial crisis. But there's also the safety consideration. The courts can't open up. The courts, it's just not safe for the courts to open up. So the courts have essentially closed down, and they're only hearing cases that are considered to be true emergencies. So even once that state of emergency ends and you get 2 months beyond that and lockouts can resume, unless your case was already heard before this pandemic started, you're probably going to be waiting a lot longer if you're a landlord. If you're a landlord, you're probably going to be waiting a lot longer to get your case heard. So the way this works is, we know the courts aren't safe to reopen. If anyone's been to landlord-tenant court, you know there's usually a couple hundred people standing around waiting for your names to be called. We know that when the courts do reopen, it's probably going to be done remotely like we're doing today with this Zoom session, but the courts haven't done that yet. As of now, the courts are basically saying no cases are going to be heard unless it's a true emergency. And the true emergency is not going to be for non-payment of rent. It's going to be for something else other than non-payment of rent. So that's the issue, that if you're a landlord, you're probably going to be waiting a lot longer than just the 2 months after the state of emergency to end before your case finally gets heard. There's currently 45,000 landlord-tenant cases in New Jersey just waiting to be heard. These are cases that were filed since February all the way through today that still haven't been reached by the courts. So yes, we know the courts are going to resume remotely. They haven't done it yet. My concern is if they're going to wait for the state of emergency to end, there's going to be such a backlog at that point that you could be well into the spring by the time these cases finally get reached. That's if you're a landlord, that's the bad news. And I know a lot of landlords, this is their life savings. This is what they've invested their money into buildings. They work pretty hard to be landlords, and it's not all fun and games like some people think. It's a lot of landlords it's just like any other business. A lot of landlords go out of business. It's the kind of thing that unless you're doing everything perfectly, it's very easy to lose money being a landlord. And now you got this on top of it where you could theoretically have tenants that are several months behind in paying their rent. The good news if you're a tenant is if you can't afford to pay your rent, you probably have at least 3 or 4 months before you're going to be locked out. That's the good news for a tenant. There's some other rules besides Executive Order 106 we should go into. One of them is Executive Order 128. It says that regardless of any compliance with the Rent Security Deposit Act or anything that we all know about the Rent Security Deposit Act that says the landlord must deposit the funds in the interest-bearing account, notify the tenant within 30 days. Regardless of whether that happens or not, the tenant can, at any point during this state of emergency, apply his or her security deposit toward rent. When does that security deposit have to be replenished? Well, it would not have to be replenished till 6 months after the state of emergency is over or upon lease renewal, whichever is later. There are some, besides the fact courts are closed, there are some exceptions. As I said, if you do have a true emergency as a landlord, if you filed an eviction and said maybe the tenant's wrecking the place or the tenant assaulted the landlord, we had one of those a few months ago. Yes, you can get into court on an emergency application, and the court will hear those applications. But that's a very, very narrow exception. think I've tried a couple dozen of them, and maybe about half of them I've won, half of them I've lost, because you really got the court not only has to be convinced that these items have happened, that the tenant has done these things, but that it is truly an emergency. So that's something that you got to look out for if you're in that situation. If you did already have your case heard and you're just waiting for your warrant of removal to be served, then you're probably still waiting for 2 months after the state of emergency is over, unless you're in that emergency situation. And I'm specifically referring to cases that were maybe heard in January or February, and you ordered the warrant of removal, but you didn't quite get it. The tenant locked out before that March 16th date when they stopped doing all the lockouts. So that's what I have on that. Now, the CARES Act is the last piece that I got to talk about. If your eviction was filed between March 27th and July 25th, you have to be very careful, because if the tenant is receiving some sort of federal subsidy, or if the landlord was federally subsidized or got a federally backed loan, which would be FHA, BHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, any of those federally backed loans, you are not supposed to file any evictions in those cases between March 27th and July 25th. If you did file your eviction between those dates and you're in that federally backed category, the best thing to do would be to dismiss the case and refile it. The CARES Act also has a bit about a 30-day notice that was also supposed to be served. I'm not going to get into my thoughts on that, because there's some debate about whether that 30-day notice is even applicable in this case. There's question of interpretation, and you'll probably spend the next 2 hours going into that. So, but the main thing is, if you do have federally backed housing, make sure that your eviction was not filed between March 27th and July 25th. And if it was, then you actually have a violation there. And with that, I think that's all I have today.
Okay.
Mike?
Mike, I want to thank you. Question for you though, before you leave out. Have you sent out any eviction notices, like some are being sent out now, telling folks that they have 30 days to be out?
30 days to be out? No,
Yeah.
no, that's not what we do. I've probably filed about a little bit over 400 evictions since this pandemic started, but
Right.
the 30-day notice, there is a 30-day notice that is referenced in the CARES Act. And as I said, I don't want to get into that, but generally speaking, you don't need to give a written notice to a tenant on a non-payment of rent case. The first notice is, generally speaking, is the eviction complaint.
Well, they're being sent out. So just
Yeah,
be aware of that.
I know what you're referring to. That's the CARES Act references it.
Mhm.
And real quickly, the CARES Act basically says you have to wait till July 25th, 4 months after the state of emergency, 4 months after the act went into effect, before you can send out a 30-day notice. Does it say you have to send out a 30-day notice? No, it doesn't say that. Most people say yes. And if you do send out a 30-day notice, is that notice that you're sending out really a demand to vacate? And if it is a demand to vacate, when has the eviction really come up? I don't want to get into all the arguments back and forth on that. As I said, I could go in, but yes, the CARES Act does reference it, and a lot of people do send out those notices.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Michael, you want to have Christopher? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Christopher, your response?
Yeah, I mean, the question I think about notices for the CARES Act.
Hey, Chris, I know you've been introduced, but just let folks know, that you're from legal service.
Oh yeah, sure. So my name is Chris Benson. I am a housing attorney with the Ocean County Office of South Jersey Legal Services, and I deal with landlord-tenant issues, as well as kind of government programs like Section 8 and other county-based programs to assist tenants with rental assistance, both application denials and terminations. And in general, I mean, I also have experience with the other areas that our office covers. So Mr. Murren's correct about kind of the timing of the previous CARES Act versus the new CARES Act, and also the more recent CARES Act eviction moratorium, it should also be noted, it basically kind of acts as a supplement for states that don't have the kind of moratorium that New Jersey has. New Jersey is effectively stronger than that, but the initial CARES Act notice requirements for federally subsidized properties, honestly, they're actually kind of in line with the pre-existing notices, which is that for if you're living in a federally subsidized property, landlords already had to give notice prior to filing for non-pay evictions, and this just kind of added in protections if you had a voucher, or if it wasn't like public property but you had some kind of subsidy personally as a tenant rather than what was attached to your unit. But the initial kind of notice bearing requirement was the kind of the first round of the CARES Act, and the more recent one. I honestly, practically speaking, with the way that the courts have been, I'm not sure the amount of notice that everybody's getting right now. I'm not sure how much this will actually impact any individual case. Frankly, just practically speaking, I'm not sure how much at all, because everyone will get enough notice at this rate. But a lot of that was more so focused on the first kind of CARES Act eviction rule.
Yeah, first, I think the 30-day notice might have actually been a reference in some states where they actually require you give a 30-day notice before filing eviction. But I know what you're saying, Chris, but you're basically saying that you had to give a 30-day notice anyway when you're evicting like a Section 8 tenant, right?
Yeah, exactly. For most, it depends on certain programs where you do, on certain programs where you don't. But it kind of supplemented that pre-existing thing. But yeah, notice requirements right now, just with the amount of time for everything. If you're not getting notice, it's because no one has told you anything at all, as opposed to, rushing to court, because there's no rush to court right now.
Right.
Good enough. Okay.
Olga, I saw that did you want to say something as well?
I just wanted to add that on the federally subsidized tenancies, specifically Section 8 and public housing, it's really important to get the word out to tenants that if they've had change of income or change of expenses, they can get their rent adjusted. And if housing authorities aren't dealing with that, if they're not properly processing rent recertifications so that people's rent reflects their actual income and expenses, they should definitely come to our offices, because that's something we can help with. There are going to be lots of people with huge rent arrearages, but Section 8 and public housing tenants should not be among them.
And I agree with you, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that's going to be a major problem, because most housing authorities, for whatever reason, some of them are like a year or so behind in their work. And at the end of the day, it's always the renter that has to pay the price. So we're going to make sure that we
send those people to us, because I think they're really good legal challenges if housing authorities don't properly process changes in income and do it promptly and do it to the day when the income dropped, not like 6 months later when they reopened their office and felt like getting around to it.
Right. Mike, a question for you, because you represent the landlords. What's the feel out there on the landlords? Now, you know that there's a lot of money that's out there to pay back rent. The problem is that, are we going to get enough time to put payment plans together, throughout? Because you're one of the attorneys that, work throughout the whole state of New Jersey. So are you going to be?
I'm encouraging it. I tell the landlord, I say, get whatever you can right now, because it's going to be a long time before this tenant gets evicted. And under an executive order that was actually passed before COVID, a previous executive order, Governor Murphy made it clear that the landlord has to accept all rent payments all the way up to the day of lockout, and technically speaking, 3 days after the lockout. So that's, I would encourage landlords, any rent that you can get, you take it, because it's not like you're going to get the tenant out for not paying it. So you might as well take any benefits that you can get. But I haven't seen too many landlords that have actually gotten too many benefits. I know you said there's a lot of money out there to be paid, but I haven't seen it.
I got it. I mean, not just me, but a lot of other nonprofits have that money. We got about $3 million to last us. Matter of fact, we've been paying a lot of the back rents now, but we're having them sign a document that they're not going to evict the person after this is over with. I think we put in, what was it, Karen, 90 days or something like that?
Yes.
So make sure that legal services get a copy of that so they can see exactly, so that we don't have these problems of we paid a lot of rent so far. So just want to make that clear.
I'll send my landlords all to you.
Natasha, would you like for me to send you that document?
Yeah, we're going to send it to them. Is Connie Pascal out there?
Yes, please.
Connie? I guess Connie's not there.
I'm here. I'm right here. Yes.
He's here. He's
Okay, Connie, so you heard everything today.
You want Natasha to say something? Because she's on.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back, Connie, you gotta hear me. You heard everything today. You know, part of your job is to, you know, listen, and we're gonna talk about a few, you know, closing issues and some of the bills that are very important to us that are out there. So we gotta make that happen. Okay, Natasha, as Connie said, is there anything else you wanna say? Can't hear you. Okay, we can't hear her. She's muted.
Natasha, you're muted right now.
Sorry about that. The only thing I wanted to say is I know Chris had a few remarks that he wanted to bring about tenants' rights and responsibilities. I don't think you were able to say that, Chris.
Okay, go ahead, Chris. That's important.
All right, yeah, and I understand that we're kind of getting close to the time, so I will be brief. Everything that Mr. Mern went over kind of in terms of the timing is accurate in terms of how long evictions are kind of suspended for. An important note for tenants, that the moratorium really focuses on rents. He had talked about how, you know, you kind of got to prove that there's any kind of other emergency for the court to grant an eviction, but it is technically possible right now for landlords to apply for an exception to the moratorium if you're being evicted for a reason other than rent. It's not automatic at all. We've seen a lot of them denied, but they can ask for that. So as a tenant, you should be aware that if there's another issue that other than rent that's going on, the court technically could still proceed. We're also seeing that it's very different county by county in terms of scheduling, how they're doing hearings, and how importantly they're doing settlement conferences. We have seen the courts try to schedule settlement conferences, I think just to work on their backlog and see if they can try to get cases off of their docket. And so a couple important notes about that for tenants. Number one, settlement conferences are optional. You do not have to participate. If you participate, you don't have to agree to what they're talking about. It can be a good way for you to communicate with your landlords in a kind of a neutral setting, often, especially with the stress of COVID and everything going right now. You know, people go into conflict and it can be difficult to communicate. So a settlement conference might be a good way to resolve an issue with the landlord that you just can't talk to because you guys fight all the time, or because there's, you know, people are being nasty or harassing, you know, something we see a lot. But it doesn't mean that you have to settle with them, and it doesn't mean that you have to kind of agree to whatever terms are being presented. But it's something to consider. Something else that we think is really important to keep in mind, right now, the fact that you cannot get evicted for non-payment of rent does not mean that rent is not due. It doesn't mean that the landlord can't try to collect that rent from you. And it also means, especially if you're trying to avoid an eviction, if you are not paying your rent to your landlord, that's going to be the same landlord next year. And if they haven't gotten rent from you for a year, it may be difficult for them to support their own business or pay their mortgage, etc. So if you're running into problems with paying your rent because of COVID or not because of COVID, for any of the other reasons that people fall behind, firstly, talk to your landlord. Let them know what's going on. Give them a heads up. Secondly, look for programs. Mike McNeil had just mentioned, you know, that there's money out there. There is money out there. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed. It doesn't mean you're automatically going to get it or that it'll come quickly if you apply for it. But everyone is going to be in a much better position right now if landlords can afford to pay their mortgages and tenants aren't having landlords file on them. Because keep in mind also, landlords can't really get evictions right now, but they can still file. And if they filed on you, it makes it difficult to rent in the future. And it's much more advisable to kind of avoid that filing on your record than try to, you know, push the fact that the emergency order helps you in a way that causes your landlord to react to it. So we always kind of recommend, and this is true, honestly, even outside of COVID times, if you can work it out with your landlord, try to. You don't have to, and often it's not possible, but it's often better to try to resolve these issues. Something else briefly that we've also seen, because there's no legal way to evict people outside of the emergency court hearings in the interest of justice, we have seen illegal evictions. We've seen utility shutoffs. There was a kind of a mass motel lockout that occurred earlier this summer in Ocean that we had to deal with, and basically landlords trying to do evictions outside of the process. During COVID or not during COVID, all self-help evictions in New Jersey are illegal. They can ask you to vacate with or without a reason, but they cannot force you to physically. They can't change the locks. They can't shut off your utilities, without good reason for it, just to try to force you out. And if they do, please contact your legal services office in whatever county. There are offices in every county in New Jersey. I work for South Jersey Legal Services, but there's legal services in every county. Look for assistance because, like I said, all self-help evictions, whether or not it's during times of COVID, they're just not legal in New Jersey. New Jersey requires a court process for evictions. And like I said, work things out with your landlord. If the property isn't feasible for you long-term because of a COVID-related job loss or some other issue, then rather than go through that eviction process or go through the stress of fighting with your landlord about it, talk to them about it, try to figure that out. If you can't, all right, you can't fight it out, you can't figure it out, so you have to fight it out. But something especially, as Mr. Myrn alluded to earlier, there's going to be a deluge of court hearings. 2021, no one knows what that is going to look like. And technically, it could be to the benefit of tenants because it delays things. But the reality is the money's still going to be due. There's still going to be a lot of stress on landlords out there, which ultimately might reduce the housing stock. And that's especially in New Jersey, that's no good for anyone. So try to work things out. If you can't, you can't. If you need help, please call legal services. And always keep in mind that as a tenant in New Jersey, you have rights and you've got the right to enforce that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
So much, Chris.
Just
Olga,
wanna
did
say-
you want to say something?
Yeah,
Natasha, you're watching out for me.
Wait a
Mike, can I just pipe up for 1
It's got to
second?
really be quick because I got to get Connie in. But also, I want to make sure that folks out there know that not just for the renters, but a lot of this money's out there also to help with mortgages. So it's not just for, renters, but mortgage money is also out there.
Very true, very true.
All I wanted to say is that if tenants are negotiating with their landlords in this day of the moratorium, it's really important that they understand that they shouldn't readily agree to an entry of a judgment of possession. Normally, when a landlord and tenant go to court and the tenant doesn't have all the money, the landlord can get a judgment of possession as a matter of law. But that judgment of possession is going to sit on the tenant's records, is going to be a part of their eviction records. With the moratorium in place, the landlord can't get that judgment of possession. So I would urge tenants to be very careful about agreeing with one. I'm sure landlords are going to try to get them in settlement discussions because that's their normal procedure of how they settle cases. Enter judgment of possession and work out a payment plan. But in this case, it really may not be in the tenant's interest to agree to that unless they're getting a really good deal in some other way.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Connie, are you out there?
Yep.
Okay, you got a little time.
I'll try to be quick.
You don't have to worry about being quick. You'll get cut off. So let's get it in. I want you to. So you reviewed. You heard everything. So give us your thoughts on that. But also, there's some things that they touched on that I'm pretty sure you're going to cover. So go ahead.
So thanks a lot for having me. I'm Connie Pascal, a retired legal services housing attorney, and working with groups like STEPS and others around the state now. I'm a board member of NJTO, New Jersey Tenants Organization. We had a whole hour's worth of presentations. I think I heard the word COVID twice. The reason we have this problem is the COVID pandemic, which has sickened and killed 200,000 people in New Jersey were killed by it, and the number is going up. The governor issued the moratorium on March the 9th, Executive Order 106, because of the public health emergency. He acknowledged, and the CDC, which entered the last federal moratorium, not the housing agencies, the CDC acknowledged that evictions will sicken people, spread the virus, and cause enormous problems because of the displacement and overcrowding. That's the issue we have now. It wasn't the tenants, it's a public health emergency. They understood that if people are evicted into overcrowding in shelters, motels, cars, or with relatives, it's going to spread the virus exponentially and kill more people. Recent research shows that. It shows the increase in deaths alone that come from eviction and subsequent overcrowding. The governor issued the order to stop that. It's still in place because that remains a serious problem. And it's important to realize there was an eviction crisis before they entered that order. About 150,000 evictions are filed in New Jersey every year, primarily affecting people of color, African Americans, low-income people, because of the structural and systemic racism that has left them vulnerable in every way. The racism that killed George Floyd, murdered him, is at play here as well. It has systematically prevented African Americans and others from achieving the kind of wealth and other benefits that come from home ownership. And everybody knows the federal government for 20 or 30 or 40 years banned FHA mortgages to African Americans, wouldn't give them to them, particularly if they were going to live in places like Levittown or other integrated communities. That was federal policy. You could spend days talking about that. The point is, Black and brown communities were most at risk from the pandemic. They have suffered the most from it, and they still suffer the most from it. It's important to realize that this crisis, which, by the way, 150,000 evictions in a good year, which is a crisis, but because it's people of color that are affected, it's not considered a crisis. When it's white people, it's always a crisis. And I'll say that at the height of the Great Recession, there were maybe 75,000 foreclosures filed. Again, 150,000 evictions every year. The anticipated number of evictions, based on studies that have been done on New Jersey, is that within the first 3 months after the moratorium ends, approximately 300,000 eviction cases will be filed in New Jersey. It could be as high as 450,000. There's no way the system could handle that, or the courts. But that's a real crisis, because if that many people were displaced, the virus would have a tremendous opportunity to spread back into the community. And we could talk again about the disadvantage that affects people of color in disadvantaged communities who have borne the brunt of it and will bear the brunt of it again, because they suffered not only the worst health issues and the most deaths, but they also suffered the greatest problem financially. Numerous reports have said the minute the governor correctly shut down the economy with Executive Order 106 and banned evictions, it basically caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their jobs, to be unable to pay their rent, even if they were a little behind. Now they're a lot behind, and basically triggered this problem. It wasn't the tenant's fault. It wasn't the landlord's fault. It was the pandemic's fault and the governor's necessary and the legislators' necessary response to it. And when it ends, it will end all at once too. It was imposed all at once. And when they blow up the dam at the end, that flood is going to come down and flood out a lot of people, including the people who continue to live in nursing homes, who are continually vulnerable, who face the problems of a spreading pandemic and a second or third wave of the virus. So what does that mean?
Can we really quickly run through those?
I'm going to talk about the bills.
Got a second.
Okay.
Okay, so this is an issue that has to be addressed, and people are realizing that it's going to take essentially 3 approaches to deal with the problem. We're going to have legislation that helps landlords deal with lost rents. They may not get all of it, but they can get some of it. And again, it should be dispersed based on the level of suffering that people have. The higher income landlords, the ones with more money, have lost far less than the lower income landlords and with lower income tenants. So we're going to need legislation to help them. And there are several bills proposed now that would give compensation to landlords. We're going to need to stop the evictions. In California and New York, they basically enacted imperfect, but certainly strong, no eviction laws. People can't be evicted for any money that accrued prior to the end of whatever eviction moratorium is out there. You could sue for a judgment, but you can't evict the people. The reason is simple. If they evict the people and they become overcrowded, people are going to get sick and die, and it's going to spread back into the community at large. So
I agree with you, Connie.
blocking evictions allows people to shelter in place. And the third bill will be designed to, and we have legislation for that. And no eviction plan has been drafted and submitted to some of the legislators. And the third prong of this three-prong approach is helping the tenants pay the rent when the moratorium ends, just the regular rent, because all studies show that millions of jobs have been permanently lost, primarily affecting lower income people and people of color, and that it will take years for the economy to come back. So in that time, we're going to have help for the people who are going to be unable to pay the rent. That's the lowest income people. That's the people living in the most disadvantaged communities because of structural and systemic racism. And we're going to need all three of those prongs. And there's bills on all three. And there's an approach that's going to be tried to bring the people together so that they can resolve it together. It's going to take all of those approaches to make sure that there isn't massive disruption, massive suffering, and a massive resurgence of the COVID-19 virus.
I want to take this time to thank everybody, all our panelists and all the folks that, came to listen to what we had to say. I truly want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Everybody be safe. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Again, thank you so much. And if you guys look into the chat, you'll see that this panel has been great. So much great information. You've given us a great direction to go in. So again, thank you so much to our housing chair, Mr. Mike McNeil.